Cool. So yeah, like you said, I'm Connor, work at a company called STR. It's a part of the CoStar group out in Hendersonville. You can find me in a few different places on the interwebs. Got the plug in the blog here, and then mostly like on LinkedIn, kind of. Don't really do the Twitter. I try, and then I'm just not that much of a social person. So, but feel free to add me on all those things. So keep in touch. Keep in touch there. Also, we've been doing some hiring. So if you're interested in a job, like specifically React or .NET, hit me up. All right. So, and if you hear a baby in the background, I have a 1-year-old and she's really giggly. So she's sweet though. So it's okay. I'll allow it. Um, anyway, so what we're going to talk about today, testing in React. We're going to do probably like half the time of like slides ish, and then like half-ish the time live demo. So if you so that way if you hate one and like the other, well, then at least you'll halfway like this. All right, why do we write tests? I'm of the opinion that we write tests for a few different reasons. One of those things being speed in terms of like being able to write a test, and then you spent 15 minutes writing it, but now it runs in less than a second, and you don't have to maybe it takes you 10 seconds to run through it manually or something like that. Well, those are 10 seconds you save an infinite number of times. So I think that's a pretty obvious one. Some of these may be a little less obvious, but reliability, I think that's another kind of obvious one that you get this like it's just really nice to know when you're working on your test that I wrote something and it's going to be the same unless somebody messes with it, right? Like which leads into my next point of having a peace of mind about it. This is like the big thing for me, because I know there are way too many times where I wrote a test, or I haven't had any tests in something, and then I go to like do a demo and I'm just like please don't ask me to do anything that I didn't actually test out and try to do. And even then, I'm still not 100% sure I did it right. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Like I have this built up anxiety about that sort of thing. So tests really give me just a peace of mind when it comes to stuff like that. And then finally, integrity. And that's not, this could be a two-way street, like or not really two-way street, but like it could be two different things. Like it could be integrity of your system, but I'm really talking about like integrity of yourself as a professional. I mean, while we may be like most of us walking into work in like flannels, skinny jeans, and Chuck Taylors, we're still at the end of the day professionals. And when people come to us with problems and we have solutions, I think we should stand behind the things that we build to solve those problems. And part of being able to do that, I think, involves testing. And I think to me, there's a good argument to be made that it is part of being a professional developer to write and know how to write tests. And in some cases, it could even be considered, reckless or dangerous to not write tests. For example, if you work for, a company like SpaceX, Tesla, Boeing, where people's lives are at stake, healthcare companies, that's some serious business. And I do not want to be the one who didn't write a test and was the reason that, something serious happened. So if you're interested, there's a talk by Bob Martin, Uncle Bob. He gives on professionalism. It's on YouTube. It's been around for years. I think that is probably one of the best cases I've heard for writing tests as a professional software developer. Not all testing is created equal, though, and there's So this part is a little interesting. So there are really three kind of areas of testing that I've defined, at least for this. You will hear, you ask 10 different developers, you're going to get 3 or 4 different answers on not only what these mean, but what about end-to-end tests? What about static tests? What about, well, okay, cool, but I've just kind of grouped them into 3 little categories. So don't take this as gospel. I'm not sure that it necessarily exists in the testing world. So I will define my terms as well, because like I said, these can be defined differently between different people. So I will define a unit test as like a method testing. Now, if you're a .NET developer, this is very familiar to you. You are testing a specific method in your suite of whatever it is that you're doing, right? So your test may be very dependent on your parameters that you have, the output that you have, all of those things. And I feel like those tests are probably the most fragile, because they're the things that can change most often. So I think when it comes to front end testing, we shouldn't be doing them, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Integration tests. I will define those. So again, this is just for the purposes of defining our terms and being able to have a shared vernacular on what we're talking about. Integration tests, I'm talking about the integration of, say, your front end to your API to your database, something like that, right? Something that takes a while to run, a little bit costly, that sort of thing. Some people may call these end-to-end tests. Whatever you want to call them, I'm saying, like, for example, if you've used Cypress before, that's where Cypress can like really come in, or Selenium, something like that. Those kind of tools work there. This is the kind of stuff that you also do manually, right? Functional tests. Also, sometimes you will hear people call these the same thing that I just called integration tests. But when I say functional test, I'm referring to something like maybe a group of units working together, you could say. Really, some sort of behavior in your app that you can test client side. That's all I'm really talking about. So if I were talking about maybe the back end world, it may be like a few different classes or a few different methods working together to perform some function, but we're staying inside the application, right? So same thing with a front end app. If I'm talking about a React app, or Angular, Vue, whatever it is, I'm saying I'm staying within the application to do this. I'm not going outside hitting some API or whatever, right? I'm testing within the vicinity of where the testing suite lives. So that being said, JS DOM is the thing that really allows us that capability. So when I'm talking about that client side sweet spot, being able to do those function tests, and the reason that I don't think we should be doing the unit tests on the front end is because of JS DOM. And JS DOM is what it does is it gives us access to a virtual DOM. So you can check out their docs or their website, whatever it is, whatever you want to do. But essentially what it does is it creates a virtual DOM in behind the scenes running on Node. So we can really, when we're writing tests with Jest or whatever against this, we can really pretend to be the user. And I think that's where this stuff just really shines. So don't hear about it very often, but JS DOM, unsung hero of the front end testing world. Expectations over implementations. This is like the cornerstone phrase for front end testing. So if you take away anything from what I'm going to talk about today, I think it would be to remember this phrase expectations over implementations. And what I mean by that is testing against expectations over testing against implementations. So implementation testing would be like testing those individual methods. Since we have the privilege of a virtual DOM, we don't have to rely on those. We can be closer to the user and start testing against expectations instead, which really is more worthwhile. It's really, I guess you could say, like I said before, in the .NET world, it's in stark contrast to that, where you would write unit tests against those specific methods. This really just enables us to be as close to the user as possible. So before I get into this little piece here on rewrite code without touching tests, I'll give a little backstory, because I'm going to go into show off a little bit of code. This is not part of the demo necessarily, but it eases into it. So where I work, we were recently, I mentioned that I work for STR. We were acquired by CoStar. We are a CoStar company, just like apartments.com is, or they're like a big name that you may have heard of, and some other big companies within CoStar. And once we got acquired about a year ago, and when we started working on some of their stuff, so I was part of a group of developers that went over to work with some of their teams out in San Diego, and to kind of get familiar with their system and all this stuff, because we're going to be integrating our stuff into it. And so when I got there, I was like, okay, how am I going to get get my feet wet with this stuff? And they were one of the team lead on the team that we had been placed. He was talking about how there was some code that was still still written in JavaScript class components that they're trying to convert everything over into as they see fit, not just one fell swoop, but as deemed necessary. We'll start making stuff functional components and adding types with TypeScript. I was like, okay, cool. That sounds like a good idea. Well, and to get my feet wet, I decided maybe I can find one of those and just kind of do that and kind of get myself familiar with the system. So I did that. Teams is running. I probably ought to kill that, because people be crazy there. Okay. So anyway, let's go back one. What I did was, this is part of our application. This is 30-second pitch. It's like a real estate management thing. We're STR, we do hotel stuff, so we're adding hotels into their mix. Right now we're looking at office properties. Doesn't really matter. This is like a subscription thing. Professional real estate managers and stuff like that use this software. So anyway, what I care about is this little filter stuff over here. So these little dudes do a lot of things, right? So this min and max, it's this is a combo. This is one component, which each of these are their own components, but they're actually from a third-party library. And they're wrapped together in a component, in a custom component we made that has these guys. And they do a lot of things. So if I put I can put 0 in here, or let's say I put 3 in here and 1 in here, it's going to yell at me, hey, you can't do that. Little things like that. It has a max, so I can't go more than 4 digits there, right? Something like that. There's a bunch of little nuances to this thing. When you tab out, it data fetches and stuff, all kinds of things. So when I went in to do this, I thought, well, probably the best way to go about this is I should just write some tests against this, because there were none. And just so that way, when I go and refactor this thing, I can have confidence that my refactor actually didn't break anything, right? I can refactor with confidence. So that's what I did. And so what I did was I started going through here, and I started defining some some things that it should do. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, but you get So in testing library, React testing library, which is the specific library that I'll be talking about and doing all this demo stuff in, it's really like really simple syntax. So, I describe my thing and then just say, it should do all this stuff, right? So I describe my min-max filter, which is the component that houses both of these. And then I started thinking, well, okay, let's just put out all the things that it should do. And, I got this big long list starting with like the very bare minimum thing. It should render, right? Like it should just show up. And then there was like some conditional logic in there that made me think, well, okay, it should also render if like the props that are coming through are undefined for the value or something like that, like not zero, not null, whatever they're, if just in case they're undefined, it should still render, all little things like that. Should fetch data on blur, but not if, should not fetch data on blur if value did not change, right? So little nuanced things like that. So I got, I don't know, a handful of these guys. And then for good measure, I even added some tests for the inputs themselves, which yes, they're a third-party library, but still, I'd never touched it before. I didn't want to break anything. I just wanted to make sure it did all the things that it was supposed to do. So I added all these tests, and that may have taken me, I don't know, a full day, a couple days, whatever it did, to figure out all the things that this thing is supposed to do. But once I was able to do that, I was able to, so this file here, this min-max filter, wonder if, well, I don't know if I'm going to look at the Git history, but we won't go there. This thing, so obviously TypeScript file, function component now, it was just a JavaScript file, right? So what I did was I just like rename, or maybe I can't even remember exactly how I did it, but you can just in here in your test, I could just like say, if I wanted to define this one as like const min-max filter 2 or something, right? Well, then I just import min-max filter 2 here and run my test, and it's running against the TypeScript component. And then if I want to go run it back against the JavaScript one, they could live side by side. It didn't matter as long as they had two different, exported names. So then I could just backspace and look at the original one, run my test, they're fine. So that was a really smooth way for me to be able to like get my feet wet. So I really, that's where this kind of thing really shines at, right? So going back to this, rewrite code without touching tests. And I have done this so many times. There's been so many components that I've built where it's like, oh man, I just, I made this like gnarly hook for something, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. And then like 3 days later, I realized, oh, I didn't need to do all that. I could memoize this thing. I could do this, and oh, this is a lot simpler. I never have to touch a test because I'm still expecting the same behavior. So that which leads into the same thing. You test against behaviors, not methods. So if I go back to look at some of these, if I look in the test, like this one's a simple one, for example, all I'm doing is rendering it. There's a method that comes with testing library just called render, and you pass it your component with the with your props if there are any. And in that virtual DOM, it's rendering it, and you have access to all these different like get by, query by commands and stuff. So essentially all I'm doing is saying, hey, get the minimum value thing that gets rendered in here, which minimum value would be the min value input box. And all I do is expect it to be in the document. That's it, nothing else. But none of these things are like, hey, like I never wrote a method that said it should, get value as number. Like no, that's not something a user cares about. I don't need to go test this method or or any of these, right? I'm testing against what actions I perform and what I expect to happen out of them, right? And we can, for example, we could look at another one of these right here. Like, so all I'm doing is I'm saying should fetch data on blur with 0 as an input. So I'm putting 0 into the minimum value here with the fire event.change. And one of the really cool things about this is, so if I have my min max filter, one of the things in the props for it, it has an on value change. So this is a way, it's a typical like React pattern, right? You allow someone to inject, you allow another component to inject like some sort of event, right? So when something triggers in that component, you want to run some code. The component doesn't care what code it runs, but the consuming parent component or whatever may care, so, or probably does because it's injecting stuff, right? So with jest, all I did was just mock that method, this on value change method, and put my own code in here. So for my test, I don't need to, on value change was probably like firing off the data requests and, all kinds of fancy logic that I don't really care about for my testing purposes. But I do care when that gets triggered. Like I do care when this method runs, because that's going to tell me when things happen. And I do care about that. So what I did was I defined a variable up here just saying like, okay, on value change has ran, default it to false. And then in my, if you notice there's 2 here, it's because I had to redefine everything in a before each. That's, that's details we might could talk about later. But the point of this is to say, in my mock method, I just set it to true when it runs, right? When on value change, I just set it to true. And now in my tests, I can actually check against that value. So I can say, well, I expect after I've typed 0 in there, on value change should not have ran yet. But when I blur, when I tab out or whatever, you can call a blur event, however you want to get out of the input, I expect that method to have ran. So the difference being here, to be falsy and to be truthy. So it ran or it didn't, right? So to me, that's just like, oh man, that was an excellent use case for exactly what I'm wanting to do to test those behaviors. And it didn't take too much finagling to get that to work. And this phrase, test behaviors, not methods, I think that is synonymous with expectations over implementations. It's really just another way to say that. And again, testing as close to the user as possible, which is exactly what I was talking about over here. Just I'm again pretending to be the user. That's the whole gist behind this thing. Cool. Demo time. All right, so I've spent a little bit longer on that than I may have wanted to, but I think we can get through this pretty quick. So I've got here just a bare bones. Oh, not yarn test. I've got testing on the mind. Yarn start, right? So I just did a npx create React app a few days ago when I was prepping this thing, and then you may be familiar with create React app. It gives you like a default stuff. I just removed all the default stuff out of here, and I think I left probably like some CSS, but whatever. We're not going to be really using it, so. And all we're going to do is we're going to pretend we got some requirements and kind of build this thing out TDD style. All right, so this is our app with nothing, right? Which is great. It's what we want right now. And here I've got some, requirements. So let's say as a user, I need to be able to enter and leave, only showing one option at a time. So maybe that's like, for our purposes, maybe we have a button that's like enter, and then when you click enter, now you have a button that says leave, and you click leave, And now, you know, cycle repeats. Now you have enter, leave, right? Toggles back and forth essentially. And then also as a user, I should see a greeting for entering and a goodbye message for leaving, right? So when I click enter, it says like, hello, click leave, goodbye, something like that, right? Something really simple. This would be something like requirements. So, and this is part of what what I would suggest to do when it comes to testing like this and knowing what to test. Start with your requirements. Like the requirements tell you what something should and should not do. So start there, right? So we'll do that with we'll say describe, and we don't really have much of a description here. We can just say app, you know, and then it should do something, right? Should. So what should it do? Well, according to this, we need a button, right? So it should render a button to enter. So maybe that looks something like this. Const here equals, we'll use the render. And then we've already imported app. So we can say app, then no props, boom. And then here you get access to a few different things you can do. If I type get by, I've got all this stuff here, right? Get by, whatever. There's get by, and then there's query by. And it's like, okay, well, which one do I use? Get by or query by? To me, I recommend get by. Query by as a like blanket. It's kind of like, I can't believe I'm bringing this up, but like const versus let. So I may be saying something really controversial here. I don't know. Sorry. But like I always default to const until I need to use let, and then I switch it over. So like const is my starting point, and if I need to, I change it over to let, right? So I would say the same thing applies here. I start with query by, and if I need get by, I do it. The difference is query by is like, it may be there, it might not. That's okay. Get by is like, I expect it to be there, whatever it is you're getting. And the reason I like the query by better is because since it allows for a null, the error message is a little nicer to you, and it's not like blows up your screen when you're looking at like your test output, your test results or whatever. And so I just use query by because it's easier to read when I screw up. And but if I need, maybe you find a specific use case where you need get by, well, that's cool too. You have you have some different options here. Which one to use? This is also a debate. The React testing library recommends defaulting to label text, and I'll explain why. It's for accessibility reasons, or sort of. It's related to accessibility reasons. You will often hear, I don't want to put words in QA's mouth, but QA often would like for people to use the test ID, which would be, so all of these are most of these are based on HTML attributes. So pretend app's an HTML element, some HTML attributes might be like ID equals, right? You've seen that one, or class equals, you've seen that one. The accessibility one, area label, right? That's what we're going to be using, for example. Or you may have seen something like this: data test ID equals. Now that's a QA thing, right? Or at CoStar, we have like automation ID. Okay. Now there are some good reasons for those things. For example, if you have multiple languages or something, and you want your area labels to be rendered in multiple languages, which of course you would want, it might be a little difficult to inject your localization library in here to get access to your different resource files for different languages. For say, like unless you just want to test in one language, maybe you could convince someone to do that. But there are like specific use cases for broad big things that happen for maybe simplifying some things and just sticking with a test ID. But I would say, unless otherwise needed, just do this, because what it does, here's what it does. Let's continue this out. So I would say expect, oh, hello. No, we don't care about that anymore. That's our VPN. Expect query by label text. We'll say enter dot to be in the document, right? So I'll save that, and then let's just go down here and say yarn test. And we're going to fail, obviously, because we don't have anything, right? We just made our app over here, right? So one failed. So now we say, well, okay, make a button, enter, save. Well, that's not going to do it either, because this is not query by label text. Query by label text is looking at the area label, right? So now that's why it's recommended to use this, because it forces you to add an area label. Not only does it force you to add the area label, it forces you to add something good, because it's oftentimes you'll see some really crappy names and it's hard to actually access stuff. But when you have to access it for your tests, it almost forces you to give it a good name. So I recommend doing that. All right, so what else should this thing do? It should, what was the requirements? It should only show one button at a time, right? So it should only show one button at a time. You say, well, we haven't given it another button. I know, and we'll do that. So I'll just copy some of this stuff. Probably should have like some little snippets and whatnot, but I'm not that cool. So we expect enter to be there. And then we expect leave. We're gonna have a button called leave, right? So we expect leave not to be in there. That's some cool syntax here. I like that. So I can say dot not to be. And I can save that, and that's gonna actually pass, right? Because there's no leave. I added enter, looks good. But that's really not the full story, right? What we want to do is we want to click enter, and then we want enter to go away and leave to be there. So I say fire event dot click, and then I can go get my slow. Okay, get my query by here. Boom, I've clicked that. And now I can just copy this, and some of you, if you're a Vim person, you're probably like cringing at how often I'm using my mouse, but that's okay. I don't do it for you. So here I want the opposite to happen, right? I want leave to be in the document and enter not to be. So now when I save that, notice my test just automatically starts running here and should fail. Yes, cool. So why? Received value must be an HTML element or SVG element. Received value has null, right? So it wasn't there. Well, let's make it be there. So now we're going to have to introduce some logic, right? We're going to have like a on click, and that's not how you do that. Handle click, we'll call it, and then we'll have a const handle click equals boom. And I'm probably going to have some like, I want this to be variable, right? Like I really want this to be like button text or something, right? So if I want that, then, and I guess I want this to be button text as well, because I want it to stay the same, button text. I probably need a need a button text, right? So I can do some use state here, call it button text, and default it to enter, right? Seems good. Why aren't you happy? Oh, it's because use state. Do I have? Sure don't. Okay, that's fine. Use state. Cool. And now you should be happy. Why aren't you happy? Because I defined it inside handle click. Probably all like, duh, dude. Don't do that. Cool. All right. So now if I save that, that's happy. And this is still going to fail, right? Because I haven't really done anything. So on handle click, I want to say set button text. Set button text. I want that to be leave. Probably should kill that so we don't get annoyed by it anymore. Exit. Okay, cool. So now what happens? Dun, dun, dun. Passed. Cool. So should only show one button at a time. So that means what it did was it clicked it and it flipped everything, right? Now I've got passing tests. I haven't even turned over to Chrome to see if this works, right? And you know what? I don't even have to because we're confident in our tests. So what else should it do? Oh yeah, it needs to show a message, right? It says I should see a greeting for entering and a goodbye for leaving. So I could say it should say hello when entering, right? That sounds like a good thing to do. And here we can copy some of this. Don't need it all, but whatever. Get enter, click enter, and then you know what? We want to expect something, but we want to expect like message to be I don't know what do we want it to be? Oh, hello, right? So save that. It's going to fail, right? Because we don't have anything called message. We can go ahead and start adding that. Now it's going to look ugly, so I'll give it a break. And then we'll say label, what do we call it? Area label. And we already know we're going to need a goodbye. I'm not going to go through the same thing I did earlier with enter and hard coding it. We know we're going to need a message. So I'm going to go ahead and say that. And then same thing here, message. And then that means we're going to need another state variable. Use state message. And you may think, why are you doing it like that? You could totally do it like this. I totally probably could. So then that looks like that. And then we're gonna do this guy. It's not going to do anything yet. Set message though. Say, oh, wait a second. This is only making me leave. What if I need to go back in? So we're going to have some conditional logic here. Let's just look at button text. I don't know. We could probably have like a status or something, but this is fine. If it's enter, then that's when we want it to be leave. And else if button text equals leave, we're going to need something similar, right? So if it's leave, we want it to be enter. And when you leave, of course, we want it to say goodbye. And when we enter, we want it to say hello. So now, I bet I'm going to get a passing test. Actually, you know what? I'm not. Why? Because expected received null. Oh, why was that? Well, that's because this thing actually returns like an HTML element. So really I need like the text of it, text content, right? So now I can expect text content to be hello. That should probably, it did not expect query by label text message. Oh, that's dumb. I didn't want to do that. We do want this to stay static and be message. Otherwise it's looking for hello or goodbye, and we don't want that. We just want it to say message. And boom, we got some passing tests. Cool deal, right? So now, and I could just copy this, just for good measure. And we want it to say goodbye. And when I click, so I got to click enter, and then, oh yeah, I got to click leave. And actually, I don't even need that expect at the top, right? Right, so enter and then leave. It should say goodbye when leaving. Should probably get a passing test here too. Cool. And then really, you got one more where it's like it should not show anything by default or something like that, right? But we don't really have to go into that. I think you get the picture, right? So cool. Well, and obviously you could do some other things like we should probably look at our app, right? Like, did this thing even work? Yeah, so look, it does work. Enter, hello, leave, goodbye. And maybe we could have like a little reset button over here. We could add some tests for that. We can do a lot of cool things with this, but that's the gist of it. Hope you guys enjoyed that, learned a few things. On to the end. And I will probably mute myself while Josh is doing his thing, so that way you guys don't just continue to hear a very happy baby in the background.
Oh, that's okay, Connor. So I know I have a few shredded that test. Thanks, Daniel, for pointing that out. Just so you all are aware, there's a little bit of a delay between when you see something and when we say something. So it might be like, so if you ask something, go ahead and ask away in chat. I'm going to queue it up. I know I have a few questions that I want to ask, and some of them so my background, I'm a QA engineer. And so I'm
Oh
very,
no.
no, actually, I very much endorse just about everything you said, which is fantastic. But I have a few questions that are kind of loaded, if you're cool with that. But I think it might help everybody, just based on my own thing.
Load me up.
Don't do it.
Yeah, and so we can just have a discussion about it too. For other people out there that are getting interested into front-end testing or haven't done a lot with it, like what have you found to be good resources for testing with React or just in front-end type testing in general? Like what's been good for you, or what would you recommend?
So there are a lot of great introductory free stuff. Okay, like there is a lot of great introductory free stuff. Particularly a guy, this guy Kent C. Dodds. He's become a big name in the front end testing community, particularly because he has there's a website called Testing JavaScript.
Yep, testing JavaScript, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that's a good website. Yep, that's it. Okay. So this is him, and I think I mentioned some of these words earlier, right? So you may find some of this stuff, some of these definitions different in other places. Now this is paid, right? So I say there's the free stuff, which you can find on like egghead.io has some good free content. YouTube has great free content on introductory testing. But if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of things, something like this, a paid resource, probably your best bet. And frankly, I have a paid subscription to Egghead, and the content on there is not near as good as what you would get out of something like this. It doesn't go into as much detail. So, and I don't know what's out there on Pluralsight. I know it's another good thing. I know there's not a lot of React content there anyway, but if you're on the Angular world, there's a Deborah Carrata. She is awesome, and she's I think she Deborah Carrata. That's what it is. She's big in the Angular world. Got a lot of good content out there. Joe Eames, he's another good one to follow. John Papa, good Angular person to follow. So those are good names to just Twitter later or something.
No, I agree. I honestly think that Ken's testing JavaScript course is probably one of the best bang for your bucks. Also, if you work at a larger organization that might have some educational budget or some discretionary budget, Ken will usually do a pretty good deal on a set of licenses. So at Webflow, we actually purchase a license for everybody that joins, and we have them go through the course. Just to be like, hey, look, I don't know what your experience is, but we sort of endorse this. So it's been a really awesome resource. So I really like that. But yeah, I +1 to everything you said. The other thing I like to remind people is a lot of times it seems silly, but just reading the docs for Jest and for React Testing Library, they've done a pretty good job just giving you an overview of how it works. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times we get intimidated. We're like, oh, it's just all these things. It's but you can kind of just read and follow along and be surprised. I really do like React Testing Library. I think that or now it's just Testing Library, maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of good stuff in here, but you can just jump right into it, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, the syntax is very user friendly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it saves us plenty of time. And the point where I took we used to use Enzyme pretty extensively, and mm-hmm. I went and search and destroyed all of that in our code base just to be let's just use React Testing Library.
I would say if you are starting, I would recommend against Enzyme. Now you mm-hmm. may join organizations that we have Enzyme tests, we have snapshot tests, we have all those things going on. They're fine, they work, let them be. But moving forward, I would recommend something like this because Enzyme, it does lend itself to that implementation testing world, and it gets mm-hmm. a little complicated and hairy. And this is just simple, straightforward, and just honestly more bang for your buck.
Yeah, and 5 years ago when Enzyme came out, it was the coolest thing ever because it let us do so many things that we didn't have in just plain old Mocha. Or Tap, if I'm going to date myself with when we just had Tap before Mocha. Yeah, so no, I agree. It's been really good to greenfield with this, and when we've had the time, we've gone and tried to start replacing it. But yeah, Enzyme works great for what you have. Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. Let me double check YouTube for more questions. No, nothing. Oh, maybe we do. Okay, hold on. Oh, Joey, great question. What are the challenges introducing tests to an already created application? This is a good question.
What are the challenges? There are many. For example, one may be let's say you're using Redux. This is a challenge I've had recently. I'm working in an app that has a huge Redux store. So the props coming in are massive for some of these components that I'm dealing with because they're pulling in objects that they may not have they may just have one, they only need 1 or 2 things out of this 15 property object or something, right? So that means if you're going to use something like React Testing Library to test this component, then you're going to have to mock all of those props to bring in, and oh crap, what does this prop do? And oh, I didn't realize it was doing all this, and it can really be a pain. So that's a big one when you have an app that was not necessarily architected for testing, because if you didn't have that in mind when you built it, you might have a bad time. I'm trying to think of some other things, obviously, like what I pointed out earlier when I went into, jumped into the CoStar world and I started writing tests. It took me a long time to figure out what to test. I may need to go ask somebody what does this thing do? Because you just because you test something doesn't mean that those tests are good. So you may forget to test something that you should have. There's a lot of things that could go wrong there. So it does have its challenges.
Awesome. That's great. Next question from David Hale. Hey, David. Good to see you. Can you speak towards where tests should run when completing tickets in CI/CD, pre-commit, just watch, all the above? What do you think?
Um, hmm. Yeah, I think it's really cool to have it if you can have it in your CI/CD pipeline. I know a lot of them, like we use Azure DevOps. It's pretty easy to plug in let the node engine just run your tests there and fail the build if they fail, and let that be a determining factor if the build passes or fails, just like a linter or something like that would. That's usually in a company or organization or whatever that has a decent build pipeline. Pretty easy to plug those in. So I would say that's a easy win there. And then, I mean, I do them locally, obviously. Before I usually just have like test watch or yarn test, whatever it is, to keep it going, just in a terminal or something, just always running, maybe on my second screen or something like that. So that way I know I'm not like jacking something up or whatever. Yeah. And also that depends on what testing you're using. So like if you're doing like Cypress, for example, that may involve a little more because of all of the things that it may need to do. For example, like you may not just be testing a component or a group of components together. You may be testing your API from your front, like a data fetch may need to happen or something like that in a Cypress test. Well, then you're talking about a whole different animal there in some cases, depending on where you work. So it's really good to have whoever's doing your infrastructure work on your side if it's not you.
No, I agree with that. Personally, I really like practicing all of it. Depending on the scale and the size of your code base, sometimes it's not possible to just watch all the things. I've got about 1 million lines of code that I might be in at any given moment in a day, which sounds kind of nuts, but like it's possible. So like we can't always do that. But at that point, we do look out for it with our CI and CD. We have some tests that take so long to run though in CI and CD and require so many resources that we do have a pre-commit hook that runs them and sets a flag and then passes that to the CI to be like, okay, this is already passed locally, it's fine, and do that. So there's a lot of different ways to configure it, but I'm a big fan of just test all the things all the time. So I like it. Adam's got a great question. How much stock do you put in code coverage benchmarks? Does aiming for a percentage become a distraction when you're only trying to test for behavior? That's a really good secondary question.
That is a good secondary. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Code coverage. Yes, I agree. It's a false god, but at the same time, it can be. Here's where I found it useful: getting people to actually write tests. So like if you have now that you could say, well, this is a cultural problem, whatever, because that's just a big issue in companies. Like most places just don't write tests. And if you don't have a testing culture, then that's hard. So sometimes to get that started, you kind of got to give a little kick in the boot, I think. We have done that in the past by saying, you know what, 30% code coverage or something, 50%, something like that. Like just pick a number, doesn't, whatever. And it's got to be covered. Or even one time on our team, we did 100% and made you explicitly have to annotate. This was a .NET stuff. So you had to annotate the code that did not need to be tested to explicitly say, I don't want to test this. So it was and that was more of a way to just force people to do it. Essentially, that kind of went in kicking and screaming, like, I don't need to do this. I don't want to do this. Well, sorry, we really need to. So get on board here. And that's really the only good reason I've seen for code coverage. Otherwise, it can be a distraction.
Yeah, I definitely see that. Like there's certain things, especially when you have a lot of cyclomatic complexity, with different parts of your code base, like where code coverage can be a lifesaver. It's like you have no idea that there's these untested code paths that are critical to how things execute. But at the other time, like chasing the white whale of a certain percentage, like it starts to feel like the tail can start to wag the dog. You're just like, well, all that we're doing is just chasing this method. Like I could just like say like assert this is only called once and then have a passing test and increase test coverage, and I did nothing. We're actually really early into introducing code coverage tools at Webflow, and so one thing we noticed is like if we just turn this on and set a hard percentage tolerance, like everybody hates it. It's like now I'm in like kind of the shame spiral of like, oh, I'm not doing like I'm never going to hit this. This is impossible. There's no way. So what we're really aiming for is like we don't have code coverage tools block pull requests if coverage goes down. We don't do anything. We send a report and it's informed. It's a part of the CI process. So on your PR before you merge it, like you're able to see what the delta is. Did you increase coverage? Did you decrease it? We left it up to a lot of our teams to decide like, hey, do you want to set more specific goals at the team level? But we found just like by giving people that information of like, hey, I'm increasing and decreasing code coverage, and here I am, and I can inspect it. That most people want to do a good job, and that
That sounds like a good happy medium.
yeah, and it's like a really good happy medium. And like there's certain parts of the code base where we do have to enforce it better. But a lot of the code coverage tools, and here's something, here's a freebie on me that I've learned from doing the wrong thing. It's like a lot of times when we set up code coverage tools, we only partially invest in it. And we don't think about like what the overall strategy is for application. Because like you could set like looking at your entire code base and saying we want X percentage is painting with a really broad brush. Looking in a very specific system, especially if it's decoupled, and setting a goal for that is great. Um, Looking in a package, like maybe you have a in-house package that's consumed by uh, other things inside of like your organization, like having good code coverage on consumed code that everything else inherits is a good goal. And these are much more like sizable and actionable chunks that are easier to digest than just saying, hey, we want 85% code coverage. And it's a little bit easier to feel like you have a win and see the value you get from it without like, I don't know, putting people in a place where they can't feel like they're winning and being successful. So I highly recommend that. Our engineering team seems to like it so far, but yeah, like the false god kind of idea, I do believe in. Like it's not a judo solution by any means. Um, let's see. Go back to one of my questions. Let's see. You kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, but something I hear a lot, like in my company, we don't usually write tests and they aren't seen as important. How do I go about changing the attitude of my peers and managers in regards to testing?
Start writing them. I think that's usually the best place to do it. Like it's got to start somewhere. You write it and then you show the value of that. If you can do that and people don't get on board, I mean, that might be a sign of something else. But I think most reasonable people when they see so you wrote a test and it helped us prevent a phone call to somebody in the middle of the night, someone to have to wake up for a triage ticket to be made, to have to get routed to somebody, to eventually get routed back to a developer, to BA to have to analyze, to QA to have to retest again. Wow. So you spent 20 minutes and wrote a test that prevented 2 days worth of work. Cool. I see value in that. I think that's what it takes. It takes somebody starting it, and preferably somebody with. Unfortunately, it usually takes someone with influence starting it. But maybe start there. Maybe start with the people the developers who you see who has influence. Get them on your side, and you might start to see some things change.
That's awesome. I love that answer. That's fantastic. Yeah, Marquise, you make a good point. Sorry if I said your name wrong. But point to times when tests have saved an outage or extra work from happening. It's a really big thing. I honestly think if you build it into your process, and you do it well, and you do it well intended, that it's contagious. People will be like, wow, like you don't have a lot of regression tickets. Like your team's not having to do a lot of rework. Like, how's that going on? And it kind of invites a story, and one that's even harder to deny at the management level. A lot of times when I see poor testing culture, it's a top-down problem, and it's not necessarily a bottom-up problem. Um, but like time is money in software, and reworking existing code is way more expensive than building new things that you can sell. So I'm a big fan of just kind of having that contagious attitude of like doing the testing. Um, let's see. Another thing is, so going back to like using like your query by label or query by test ID. Um, does adding these test IDs, do you think it affects bundle performance or anything like that? Like, is it bad to have these in? Like, or is there like a trade-off here? What do you think?
I don't know. I would say if there's a performance trade-off, there's probably not much. I wouldn't
Yeah,
think.
yeah. And so I actually I only asked that, and again, a loaded question. I only asked this because I see it come across a lot. So there's a lot of different like Webpack polyfills that you can even have that strip these out, like Webpack plugins. It'll strip them out if you need to strip them out at runtime. Like, sure, you can do it. At the same time,
Don't let that prevent you
yeah,
from doing this.
like you're adding but you're adding kilobytes, if that, even to your bundle, and it's more likely that you have some sort of non-performant uh like function that you wrote that's going to cause a whole lot more problems.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I'd be more worried about that function that's not wrapped in a callback or something like.
yeah. um I have also seen kind of that attitude that you've talked about. Like, I come from a QA background and QA engineering, and I've seen that attitude of like, we want test IDs for all the things. And that has been complicated because for the longest time, we couldn't have them at all. We didn't have anything. Like, so we're like, please give me a semantic class. Like, I don't want a world of nested divs. And if a lot of you remember React like 5 years ago, it was like nested divs as a framework. So we've come a long way since then. But I do think that, when all else fails, having one of those data HTML objects is awesome. But testing through accessibility, I think, is a really good behavior, because you can use, like, you can read the information that's out there. Like, if it's a button that says do this, it's like query by the button that says this. Like, query by the element. Like, use the ARIA label. Like, because when you're testing behaviors, like, well, what is it called? Like, what does it do? What purpose does it serve? There's been so many times where, so we actually enforce, we prefer ARIA selectors as a means to test anything. So if you go to put in a test ID and there is an ARIA selector, like, we have a linter error that gets thrown, because we're like, we want you to prefer this. But in other places, when we don't have that, when we have to do the test ID, it's really like a question of like, well, do we need this? Or have we created like a UX experience that doesn't even really describe like what it is that we're doing? Like, do we add a button for the sake of adding a button, or do we add a div that we called a button, which is a really bad idea, but still gets done all the time. But I find it to be really, really helpful, to be intentional about that, because accessibility has everything to do with about like the logical and semantic design of your UI, as much as it does like being having like accessible services. And it's really awesome. There's a great tool. There's a great resource out there called DQ University, and they have a lot of information out there on accessibility on the web, and I encourage people to take a look at it. We've been working on accessibility a lot, but it's really changed my mind about how testing should even work, let alone front end layout. Um, cool. I think we might be done on questions. Is there any final words of wisdom you have for us, or uh, any any shout outs? How could people, do you want people to contact you? You want them to leave you alone? I know you had your slide up at the end, but
Well, like I said earlier, if you're in the job market, hit me up on LinkedIn. We are looking for awesome React developers and potentially a .NET developer too. So if you know somebody, or if you are that somebody, that would be dope. We're about to work on some cool stuff. That's my baby. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it.
yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Connor, thanks once again. We will, for those of you that came in late, this should publish right when it's done. We'll be back next month. I think we're still looking for a talk. So if you have some ideas, like shoot us an email, reach out to us on Meetup. We're on NashDev and the JavaScript channel, or you can send me or Katie, Will, any of us a DM. But thanks everyone, and we will see you next month.
Thanks, Connor.